Founder's Pick Podcast, Picks and Perspective with Chris Johnson. Palpable.
Yeah, here we are.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Greg. I appreciate you, man.
Oh, my pleasure. Is it bright enough? I can't even, I didn't really.
You could use a little bit more light if you had it.
Let's see.
But
How that goes. Is that a little better?
oh yeah, that's way better.
All right, cool.
Yeah, it looks good, man.
So,
Where are you based at?
well, right now we're in Oklahoma. So,
Oh, okay.
kind of a long story, but I was in Vegas for 10 years. And then my fiance had some health issues, so her parents live in Oklahoma. So we sold our house in Vegas, which was nice because we actually literally doubled our money on it.
Oh, good.
And then we moved to Oklahoma, and we're staying with her parents until we decide what we're going to do next. And now that she's really doing well health-wise, she's kind of recovered. So we don't really need to be here. However, with the craziness that's happening in the world right now, this is actually one of the most desirable places to be because we're out in the middle of nowhere. It's literally a cattle ranch. So there's there's gardening. There's, if you had to go hunting, you could. I mean, if things really went terrible, we could survive here. So, but we are looking to figure out if we want to go back to Vegas. And right now, we're just it's sort of a weird time because we're sort of like, what are we going to do? What do we want to do?
Sure.
Well, all this craziness happening, we're sort of like, maybe we should wait a second and see where the world is going. To help just
Man,
right.
sounds like that's the common story. Like, I mean, I was living I moved to LA last year, in the Bay Area. I'm from Northern California most of my life. Spent some time in Seattle, but I was like, oh, I'll go to LA and I'll do the Kiesel thing, man. I love Jeff and I'll do this thing. And got down there and we started kind of getting comfortable. And then this hit. It was like, okay, I'm not so sure I want to be in LA during all this, like, I don't know. So I'm back up north in Chico,
cool.
kind of my hometown area, and kind of like you, I mean, like, hey, I was doing fine down there, but when I came back here, I get like 3 times the amount of space for the same amount of money.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, even Vegas is still a great deal today. Like,
oh yeah,
you can get a lot of real estate. California is just one of the worst. To get just an average, just to have a normal house is like you're spending what you would spend especially in Oklahoma. An average house, you could live like Brad Pitt here, for for the kind of money that you spend to just get an average house in California. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you're safe. I'm glad that your lady is feeling better, man. That's all real positive news.
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
How other than that, how have you been dealing with kind of the lockdown and the quarantine? Are you staying sane, or what? How are you taking care of yourself?
Luckily. So yeah, I've got some things. I have some business stuff. Some things I can't talk a whole lot about, but I have some things going on in Rochester, New York. So I actually deliberately. So I was there last week, and I drove because I just don't feel like dealing with the airports. I don't feel thermometers and who knows what. TSA was already not really my favorite bunch of people. But now it's like if they're going to be with thermometers and all of this other stuff and testing, so I just figured I'd drive there. But yeah, I've been really busy. It's been crazy busy because we've had a lot of sort of online master classes and a lot of remote recording projects. I've been working on my instructional content that hopefully I can have up and ready and available by the end of the year. I'm really, really hoping to. I'm working on my new album. So yeah, there's like, it's actually been, for me personally, I've been busier in a way more busy now than I have prior to all this stuff.
Wow. That's incredible news.
It is weird. I think there are beneficiaries and losers in this thing because, like, for me, what I'm noticing is that so many people are home now, and they're kind of like, huh, well, let's record something. Let's see if Greg Howe will be on it. Hey, maybe I should take some lessons from Greg Howe. So there's just all this stuff happening because I think, I mean, it's good for me, but not necessarily great for the world. It would be nice to just have us all interacting again and be on tour and be able to go out and, you know, just coexist. But until then, yeah, I've been pretty busy.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, you're right. In a lot of ways, there's more of a captive audience at this moment because more people have more time on their hands, right? Yeah, and I'm kind of actually, and strangely, I mean, there's always a fault, no matter what. When times are normal, there's a fallout on that side too, because you have a lot of people working and not like expressing their craft or getting creative as much because they're in the grind of, you know, doing their job and having to come home. Whereas, like, I'm kind of interested in seeing what happens going forward, right? Like, how many countless shredders and incredible musicians of all kinds and all flavors come out of this pandemic, you know?
Yeah.
I wonder.
There's going to probably be some amazing musicians that start to emerge in about 2 years from now that all were just getting all their stuff together for this, that had nothing else to do. And a couple years from now, we're just going to see these incredible musicians that they'll all be like under 14 years old, of course.
Yeah, because they just stayed home. They were homeschooled and staying home for, you know, X amount of time.
Yes.
Pandemic hit just at the right time for them to shed it up.
Exactly.
It's well, and I'm curious. Like, I mean, I went back and I was trying to remember when I first heard you, when I first found out about Greg Howe, and I was like, when was that? And I thought, I thought it was the Soundproof record, which was the first record that I listened to all the way through because John Richard actually got in touch with me. He was like, hey, I'm on this new record. I'm like, what? Oh, good job, man. Oh, it sounds sick. You know, I was like, so cool. Because he was so into it, but I was like, that's not the first time I've heard that voice on guitar. I was like, okay. Where is it? Where is it? And then as I was looking through this morning, I was like, oh, wait, it was on the James Murphy Convergence album.
Wow.
That was my first taste of Greg Howe that I remember, that it stuck in my ears. And
that's a ways back, right?
That was like 96.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Shrapnel release.
Yeah.
And I'd seen your name listed there, but like I was like, oh, whoever that Greg Howe guy is, man, he's a player, you know? Like I wasn't tuned into it, but like I knew James through Testament and that whole thing when he kind of jumped in for Alex Skolnick when Skolnick left. So it's the only reason why I knew about him.
Right.
But
well, that's great. That's very cool.
Yeah. So I was, you know, tracing it back and thinking about the voice, and it was also interesting just because you have such a unique approach to me in my head. Like you have a unique approach to fusion in general, and I was curious, like, who were the first few people? What, like, because I know there was a time before you really kind of delved into the fusion, and then there's a point in your career where you're like, oh, this is now the new sound of Greg Howe, and you've been evolving from there.
Yeah.
What shifted? What made you?
Yeah, it's great question. So, you know, I guess it's easier for me to answer it in a fully comprehensive way so that you just get a picture of my weird brain. But, you know, when I started, I think I was like a lot of guys where, you know, you want to be a rock star. You know, you're watching MTV and you're like, whoa, I want to do that. You see all these cool guys and all those LA players and Warren DeMartini and
oh yeah,
George Lynch. And of course I was a Van Halen fanatic back then when I was a kid. When Eruption came out, it was like, you got to be kidding me. What is this? You can't do that on a guitar. Guitars don't do that. So prior to that, I was just sort of a teenager that dabbled in the guitar. And I thought to myself, I can, you know, every time I'd learn like a Jimmy Page solo or some solo I'd hear on the radio, it was pretty easy for me. And Jimmy Page, when I was a kid, you know, in the 70s, he was considered like, this is the rock god. This is the greatest rock guitar player ever. And I'm sitting there thinking, I believe that, but I actually can play pretty much everything he plays, so I must be great. right? It's that false, childish kind of thing, where the only measurement is kind of technique. You're not listening to all these other super important nuances and subtleties. But anyway, when Van Halen came out, even from a technique place, it was like, what the heck is he doing? What is that?
Right.
And it became so important to me to crack that code because nobody knew what he was doing. Back then, when you heard stuff that sounded like this, they had it in the tab books as a like a flamenco, one note per string thing, because it just wasn't known. It just wasn't popular to be tapping. And so that you try to imagine that for me, I grew up in a small town in Washington, New Jersey, very small. So there wasn't a lot of influence. There wasn't a lot of musicians. There wasn't a lot of teachers. And we were in sort of a rural area. So there wasn't a lot to grab hold of other than my own sort of imagination and just hearsay. So there were all these rumors that Van Halen was using his right hand. And I just assumed, oh, that means he knows how, he's a flamenco guitar player who has applied this to rock distortion and stuff. And I, to the point where I actually took lessons for a summer from an amazing flamenco classical guitar player, because I wanted to learn how to play Eruption. That was honestly what it was. And interestingly enough, this guy was a very good player, and he was young. I was very young. I was a teenager, but he was probably late 20s. And he could actually play it like that, like they had.
Really?
Yeah, but you could tell, my ear even back then could tell, like, okay, yeah, but not really. Something's not quite the same. He's phenomenal, this guy, but it wasn't the same. Anyway, long story short, my friends and they all went to a Van Halen concert at Nassau Coliseum in New York. I think it's in New York or Jersey, or somewhere over there. And I just wanted to see, I wasn't really even a huge fan of the band. I just wanted to see him play. And so I had my binoculars, and I was just, and then within like 30 seconds when they came out on stage, he kicks into the tapping thing. And I was like, I just couldn't wait to get home and just pick up my guitar. So they dropped me off at like 3 a.m. I run upstairs to my room, plug in my guitar into my old little amp, whatever it was, and I played Eruption.
Wow.
And I was the first kid on the block, so to speak, in that era, in my area, that kind of was able to do that. So I started to gain this reputation as this kind of young hotshot guitar player.
Yeah.
And really, it was always about, like with a lot of kids, it was always about technique, always about how fast can I get, what are the cool, tricky, showy things I can do. But as I got more into it, music started pulling me in. So then I actually really genuinely started to become interested in music. And suddenly all my interests that had been very rock oriented and image oriented, suddenly I'm like listening to Larry Carlton and going, that was cool. I don't hear Angus Young doing that. I'm listening to Lee Ritenour and John Schofield and Pat Metheny, and there's different things that are happening. In my mind, I always loved the excitement and the fire that came with rock players like Yngwie. Then Yngwie came out, and he, of course, took technique to another level. And not just technique. One of the things that I always liked about him was that there was a genuine fire, that vibrato, that aggressiveness, that in-your-face thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I always loved that attitude, and I always thought to myself, how come people don't have that fire in the jazz fusion world? How come it's always one or the other? And I always thought, wouldn't it be nice to have that kind of Yngwie technique, but with these maybe more sophisticated harmony musical platforms. So I just was really listening a lot. Hold on a second. We're doing the podcast. I'm in the middle of it, Cass. I got to call you back. Bye. that's kind of what happened. So behind the scenes, even though we had a cover band and we were doing a lot of music and it was mostly all rock, we were doing all the guitar, 80s stuff that was all guitar oriented, right? We had a cover band. My brother was the singer, and so we were doing everything from Ozzy Osbourne to Van Halen, of course. Bands like Dokken and Rat and everything that was guitar, Whitesnake. But in my own secret hiding places, I was listening a lot to these other forms of music, other genres, particularly fusion and jazz. And I remember specifically stumbling across Scott Henderson with a band called Players back then. So I had missed his whole thing with Chick Corea, but I heard him with this band Players, which was, I think, Jeff Berlin, Scott T. Lavitz on keyboards, and then Steve Smith on drums. One of the most amazing fusion albums to this day that I've ever heard. It's called Players. You can't find it. I found it on the internet, I think, once. Amazing, amazing music. And it really changed me because I could tell that Scott was kind of in the same place I was at. But from the opposite end. So he had all these jazz chops. He could play over 2-5-1s. You could tell he had studied jazz and jazz language and standards and the real book and stuff like that. But he also had this rock, blues, aggressive thing, this soulful thing. So it wasn't just sophistication, it was real soulful. So he became a huge influence on me for a while in the late 80s. And so when I got signed and did my first album, to finally answer your question, I already had a lot of my rock chops together, and I had done all that, practicing scales and arpeggios and blah, blah, blah. And then also meeting Jason Becker and hanging out with him when I did my first album, my God, I learned probably more technique things with just hanging out with him for a month than everything that I had learned prior.
Wow.
Yeah, and he was so sweet. This was like scary, right? So I submit my demo to Mike Varney in 1988, and to be honest with you, the demo that I sent him wasn't really that hard rock. It was kind of like these jazzy chord changes, a lot of major sevenths, and those kinds of chords. But I'm soloing over and kind of ripping with distortion over that. They weren't even songs, they were just grooves. And I wasn't expecting to hear back from him, but he called me back and he was like, yeah, I got your demo. I'd love to see if you're interested in doing an album with me. So I thought, you gotta be kidding me. Wow, So when I got flown out to LA, San Francisco, Mike Varney picks me up at the airport and giving me a sort of a tour of San Francisco and getting to know each other. And, he's got this music playing on his cassette player, low volume, the whole time we're driving around, and it's this crazy guitar. I can just hear it. It's low volume, but it's outrageous, right? I mean, this is coming from someone who had already been listening to Yngwie Malmsteen and Tony McAlpine and these guys that were just pushing the envelope of guitar.
Sure.
And now I'm hearing something that's at least that, if not more. And I'm just like, what? So finally I said to Mike, what is this? Who is this? And he's like, oh, that's a guy, that's Jason Becker. He's like 18 or something, whatever he was. I don't know, it's a kid, And then he says, he's going to be at the studio while you're recording your album. And I'm like, no. Tell me it's not true. Because it was intimidatingly good. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It was intimidatingly impressive. So when I met him, he just turned out to be literally one of the very nicest, sweetest guys. People, I don't mean sweet in that way, but you know what I mean? Just gentlest people, and just kind, and just could not wait to show me anything I wanted to know. And always very interested in what I was doing. Like, oh, what was that lick? Oh, that was cool. What, just always, just super guy. We really hit it off. And I learned so much from him in such a short amount of time. So that was big. And then the next two albums were sort of my rock band. We got to record on the Shrapnel album. But So to answer your question, finally, all this time I had been listening to a lot of fusion and more jazz-influenced music. And by the time I did my 4th album, which was the Introspection album, the label, even the Mike Varney's label, Shrapnel, had evolved enough that I could get away with not being so heavy metal. When I did my very first album, he literally had to say to me, you have to write your songs much more rock. This is a heavy metal label. We've got Racer X. I did Yngwie a few years ago. I've got Tony McAlpine. I've got who else did you have? Vinnie Moore. All these guys, and they're all amazing players. But it was all very rock, very metal. So my demo didn't really work for him. He was like, I like your guitar playing, but you need to put this into a context that works on my label. So my first album is more of a heavy sort of blues thing. And, Billy Sheehan, of course, helped make that kick-ass.
Totally.
But by the time I did Introspection, which was in '93, the label had evolved. He had his blues bureau thing. He was doing other things. And I got to record that album at home, so I wasn't going to have him around to monitor and tell me what I can and cannot do. So I just started writing songs that were just in my heart, and I just felt like, and I wasn't trying to write fusion. So this is another thing that's interesting. It was really weird when the Introspection album came out, and I'm looking at all the reviews in the magazines, and they're like, suddenly I'm seeing, instead of seeing my name come up next to people like Paul Gilbert or Vinnie Moore or something, my name's starting to come up next to guys like Frank Mbali and Scott Henderson. And I'm like, really? Really? It was weird to me because I didn't hear myself that way. I always heard them as being way more advanced, which I think they still are. But I mean, just the notion of that I was being considered a fusion guitar player was I was probably more surprised by that than anyone. I didn't expect that. And I don't think that, I think if I feel good about a contribution stylistically to the guitar world, it's that I feel like I was one of the early guys, if not the guy, that sort of took techniques that would normally be associated with rock and shred rock and putting them into contexts that were a little bit more fusion-y or jazzy or less aggressive. And that kind of seemed like it started to become the thing. That's like the thing now.
Yeah.
So that's how that happened, really, to be honest with you. And I was a little nervous when Introspection came out, because remember the making of that whole album, Mike Varney was not there. He didn't have a producer with me. He left it up to me. So there was a chance I could have submitted that album to him and him say back to me, no, we're not putting this out. This material doesn't work on my label. I don't like this. Or it was a little nervous. I remember being a little nervous, like, I hope he likes this. But he did, like he was open to it. So
wow.
That's the very long, drawn out response to your question.
No, it's great. I love hearing the history, and we got plenty of time, so it's never a problem to take the long way home, on this. I love hearing that because like for you being a fan of like Gambale and Henderson and all that stuff, and be listening to all this stuff, and then be asked to write a rock record. Like, I need you to do a rock thing, and you get Sheehan in on it, and like he's holding it down. And then even so, you go and you put it into that context, and everybody goes, nice fusion. That's really cool that you're a fusion guitar player. You're like, wait a second, that's not, well, okay. I mean, I do listen to those guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's cool. That's a neat discovery for yourself, right?
It is a neat discovery. And it also, and the other thing I discovered about myself through this process, sometimes I watch guitar players, especially now on YouTube and the internet, lets us see everybody.
Oh man.
So many amazing players, and so many guys are good at literally displaying and illustrating their influences where they can compartmentalize them, where they can say, I used to listen to this guy for a while. He was a sort of bebop jazz guy, and that's where this came from. And then I was listening to this guy who was more country. and they can compartmentalize. I can't separate. Like my stuff is all in one pot.
Yeah, one big stew.
Yeah, it's a big stew, right? I can't really. So I don't. So in one way, it's a blessing because it really makes me feel better than anything when people say you have a unique voice. That's more important to me than anything. I don't care. You know, people, big fans, of course, will sometimes say super flattering things like, "Dude, you're the best. You know, you're the best ever." But obviously, that's just, you know, guys being really adoring fans. But when I hear people say, "I can spot you out of the lineup right away," that is what I always wanted more than anything. And so that is the biggest thing for me. So in a way, as much as I sometimes wish I could separate these influences I've had, there's another side of me that's sort of like happy that I can't, because I really can't help but sound like me no matter what I do. And that's
the biggest achievement, maybe. You know?
Yeah, for me, it's everything. Yeah, it really is.
I know every guitar player is a little different as how they scale their success and whatnot, but over the years, the more I've talked to the greatest players on the planet, I think that is, and maybe you'll hear this from your own perspective, as you would go back to those earlier formative years and you heard the Van Halens and all your favorite guitar players come about, and they were so recognizable. You're like, oh, so that's so unique. Like that eruption thing, you're like, okay, nobody's done that before. I have to understand more about that yearning for it, and then finally getting to see it and assimilate technique into your world. I think what a beautiful thing to not be able to separate it, because you not being able to separate it is almost the reason why you have a unique voice. Right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's exactly what. I mean, and that's and that is not to criticize guys that can do that, because I'm sure that many of them do have a unique voice and the ability to do that. But I do think it helps to simply understand that, like, this is simply my voice. Like, I'm not good at impersonations. I'm sorry. This is how I sound. And then to finally embrace that. Yes, I think it makes the process more, I think, I'm sort of agreeing with you 100%, and I'm trying to make sure that every guitar player who who can compartmentalize their influences is not being insulted right now, because
sure. You know, well, it takes all kinds, man, and I think that's that's what we're both getting at here, is that, like, there are people. There's a wide spectrum of player, a wide spectrum of listener. You know, and we're just outlining what it took for you to become who you are now. You know, and through the years, right? So it's not a dig to anyone that's out there that's really able to compartmentalize. And
great, yeah.
And some people are so. I mean, like some players, their gift is their ability to be a chameleon and jump in and sound just like Marty Friedman, just like Jason Becker, just like that, to the T, right? And that's like
which is a
strength, which is a whole different incredible thing.
Yes.
And that may be there. What's that?
Something I'm really not good at all.
Right. And for you, like, that wouldn't be a top shelf goal of yours either necessarily. Right. It sounds like you're on the side that is about free expression, finding your thing. So those of us that are on the side of, like, looking for free expression and finding one's own voice and own way. I mean, like, these words, we didn't make these words up that we're using to communicate right now. Right. Like, we're not the innovators of the words. Right. We're just using them to best illustrate our experience.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. I was going to say something about that too. As you were saying that, it'll come back.
That's okay. My main question on this podcast a lot of times is about guitar picks, and we talk about everything here, but I love to know about history of guitar picks, because I don't know anybody else is really asking these questions. Okay. So I'm curious about where your relationship to the guitar pick began. Was there anybody that was instrumental that maybe, influenced you to pick up a certain kind, or was it just laying around?
Literally,
and then how?
A pick, like literally a pick?
Yeah, a guitar pick. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting question. Wow.
Yeah, and how did you get to play what you play now? Has it always been that way? Was there somebody that came through and said, "No, Greg, don't do that. Use this"? You know, like I'm curious about that because it's
That's
a very
great. Yeah, that's a really
thing.
Good, that's a good question. If I were to be honest and as clear about my memory of all this as possible, it would be that I think I've tried just about everything from super thin to super heavy to small, I've tried all these different things. Again, as a kid, you tend to be influenced by whoever you look up to, right? So
Sure.
As a young kid, as a teenager, I was always, Van Halen was like the guy for me for a few years. So it was always like, what's he doing? What's he playing? What's the pedal? What's his pick? Whatever he's doing, I want to do that. So I think, I don't remember, I think he was kind of a Fender medium guy. So I think I was doing that for a while. As I got older and I got a little bit more, this is interesting, I got into alternate picking from listening to all the, the shrapnel guys. And I noticed that for me, it was easier to sound clean and more precise with thicker picks. And there's, interestingly, there's less pick attack with a thicker pick. There's more attack with the thinner picks.
Right.
So when guys are, and so I noticed a lot of times guys who are really, really, accurate with alternate picking, like say Paul Gilbert and Vinnie Moore, I think they often will use thinner picks because they want that precision to be heard. Whereas somebody like me who, if I really practice alternate picking a lot, I can get it to be pretty good, but it's never been something it's never been a sound that works for me. It's never been an approach that I can make work in improvisation. There's too much thought that has to go into the execution. Where I can't, it's hard to simultaneously be feeling creative while that's happening. Hard to put that into words. Kind of like if you had to be creative giving somebody a tour of your city, you'd want to be a good driver first, right? So you could point to things and say, oh, look over. If you were focusing so much on driving, it would be hard to be a good tour guide, It'd be hard to be creative as a tour guide. So that's kind of how it feels with alternate picking with me. But in the attempt to do so, and discovering that thicker picks help me to feel and sound more accurate, I also discovered that there's something with the attack that works better with when I started getting the hybrid picking. So hybrid picking, as you know, I don't know why they call it that, but basically plucking another string with a finger.
Yeah.
I noticed that it seemed like if I were to do things like this, so I'm going down hammer, pluck, down hammer, pluck, the pick and the pluck felt more similar tonally, the thicker the pick was. So
sounds more like your fingers.
A little bit more like the finger, yes.
Yeah, so that you're not like drastically changing tonality between picks and plucks.
Right, between consecutive notes, right. So, and they seem to roll, I don't know. So anyway, these days I'm using these 2.0s basically.
Is it the Gator grip?
Yeah, not the Gator grip, or I don't think, but
it's a Dunlop though, yeah? The
Dunlop, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
so
maybe it is the Gator grip. It's the stuff that actually sticks to you better when you start sweating.
Yeah, I think the Gator grip is what it's either that or Delrin, I assume.
One of those.
Delrin 5. It's a matte finish versus
yes.
So it's probably Gator grip.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I've been using for the last probably good 10 years or so.
Wow.
But I have gone through phases, and every now and then, I'll be on tour, or somebody will hand me a pick and be like, "What do you think of these?" And I'll be like, "Whoa, this is I like this." Every now and then something, how the grass is always greener a little bit. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, sometimes you can pick up another pick, even if you're not going to actually move towards using that full time. But I know from experience, having just a crap ton of picks,
Yeah.
Especially a lot of small time builders send me stuff because the podcast and whatnot. And I'm like always like curious. It's a weird shape. I'm like, it's like different length, different material. But all of a sudden I find myself inspired playing slightly different because this thing makes me want to emote a little bit differently.
Yes. Yeah, it inspires a different kind of sensibility about things. That's what's good about screwing around with sounds and different picks, even different guitars, and because I think most musicians know that it just induces a different kind of creative agenda. You just sort of start thinking, oh, wait a minute, I don't normally get pulled this way, but this is pulling me this way. This is kind of fun, I like this. So
yeah. Oh man, I think that what's interesting is that we get comfortable in our groove, right? We have our thing that our go-to. We're like, oh, this is what helps me play so well, or I feel so comfortable here. If we're open, as most creatives tend to be on some level or another, somewhere in their approach, they go, oh, that new pedal, I'll plug that in. All of a sudden, like a whole new world opens up. But what I love about the pick or a guitar or a string gauge change is that all of a sudden the exact thing that my muscle memory is used to is kind of gone, like especially if it's extra thick or extra thin on a string or a pick, and you have to like recalibrate your approach.
Yes.
Like your hand, like you're like, oh, I have to, okay, so that's too easy to do the thing, so I gotta like back off a little bit.
Yeah.
And then in that lightness of approach, or in the heavier approach to try to compensate for what's not normally there, something else flows out.
Something else comes out, right? That's exactly right. Yeah. It's funny. I remembered what I was going to say before. I don't know. It feels like you kind of relate to how my brain kind of thinks. I need some semblance of uncharted territory to stay inspired. I like to. I don't mean like, oh, I'm going to do a disco album. I mean, just like, something has to be a little bit not in my comfort zone that I'm shooting for to keep me inspired. I kind of get uninspired when I just keep hearing myself do the same thing over and over again. Oh. And the reason I'm saying this is because it's not, I'm not even saying that that's good. I'm saying that sometimes when I hear guys whose names I won't mention, but we've all known artists who've been around for many years, and every time they put an album out, kind of pretty much sounds like the
same thing.
Yeah, kind of the same thing. And there's a side of me that almost is envious of that, because it's like I can't imagine being that comfortable with just like, this is what I do. Here's what it is. Here it is. You know what you're going to get when you come to this stand for hot dogs. It's going to be the same flavor every time. And so that's kind of a cool way to just be like, this is how I play. I have never been comfortable with that, because the moment I start to hear myself feel, oh, I did that chord change already. I did this thing. I played that lick a bunch of times. But, I've addressed that musical thing before. I tend to lose the inspiration. So I always like to challenge myself a little bit with, I wonder what would happen if I did an album called Extraction, which is really as far in the jazz direction of fusion that I've ever gone. And it was, a lot more advanced chord changes, a lot more advanced rhythmic ideas, really getting into more of like almost like, the highlighted moments of say Tribal Tech or something, and a lot of Chick Corea, just very, very fusiony. And I remember, because I had Victor Wooten on that album and I had Dennis Chambers, and
cool.
Yeah, and in my mind I kept thinking, this has to be a higher level. These guys are great. And at the time I was on tour with NSYNC, which of course is pretty much the opposite end of this musical spectrum there.
Right.
And so, and the tour was delaying the release of this album. So, and it was because it was a long tour. And there was actually 2 tours, and so the more time that went on, so eventually this album was like 2 years late, and I'm getting pressure from the label, and I'm feeling my own inner pressure because I want to get this album out. But the more time that went by, the more I kept thinking, well, since this much time has gone by, it's got to be, now it has to be even better. Now when people finally hear it, it's got to be great. So I kept, my standard kept going up and up and up and up when I was making that, doing that album. But I do, I'm really glad that I did it and got it out of my system, because I no longer have this desire to have this super mature sounding, I take that back. Mature is not a good word, but the super advanced harmony delivery of music in the form of fusion. I can tell that I needed to get that out of my system, and so I did. And now I'm ready for, I'd be more psyched about doing a blues album today than I would probably just doing another album that sounds like Soundproof or Introspection. So that's what keeps me, part of what keeps me energized is just doing something that allows me to be me, but in a different kind. Almost like an actor would probably get bored if he kept being, typecast and doing the same role over and over again.
Right.
You see how excited they get sometimes when they get to really do something different, or out of their element.
It's a bit of stimulation, man. It's like, I feel very similar in that, like, I am very impressed with people that are very blatantly themselves over and over again. Like, because I genuinely, like, there are parts of me, like, every day I get up, I do drink coffee. I drink it the same way. I finally figured out the way I like to drink coffee.
Yeah.
And I don't want anybody else to make coffee for me because I got it figured out. So there's a few things in my life that I'm like, I'm good. Like, I mean, occasionally I'll try something, but I kind of got it sorted out, so I don't really feel like I need it. But through most of my life, the spice is the variety. And it's like, okay, I want reiterations on the theme. We're definitely working with instrumental guitar music, so I mean there is a constant here, right? But within that framework, let's spice it up and let's see how we can, because the thing that sucks, I think you were kind of alluding to it a little bit, is like, like you start working on new music and you're like, oh man, that key change is so good. Oh wait, I've done this a few times.
Right.
Am I really going to go down and try to recreate this thing again?
Right.
It almost seems like the shortcut or the easy path here when I could stimulate myself by really kind of stepping outside of that box again, trying to push myself into new territory.
Right. Yeah. And for me, honestly, what works the best is to literally be on the other side of it. So I say, literally, when I'm writing songs for a new album or for anything, and it's funny because students will ask, where do you get the, what's the process of writing? Where do you start? Blah, blah, blah. Of course, there's no answer because everything's different. Every single song comes from a different place. But one of the things that's common with me is that I have this thing that I do in my mind that always works. And so I picture somebody, you'll relate because you're in California. I picture somebody driving to work on like the 405, or the 101 or some crazy LA traffic place. 8 in the morning, irritated, people cutting them off, it's traffic jam, everything's just a pain in the ass. So they grab a CD and they put it in. They just want to get taken away from this thing. And they just want to hear something that's going to get them in a better mood or get them out of this mood or just take them away from this current reality. And when they put that CD in, when I sit there and see that scenery, this guy, and then the music's about to play, I hear the song. So literally, I hear what he's about to hear. And then I'm like, oh, that must be my song. So it's this weird, it's a weird thing that works for me because sometimes it's like, oh, I know how that album starts. It starts with a drum intro, or it starts with that weird noise, or it actually was it started with a sound effect and some voice that came in, or whatever it is, but I hear it. And it directs me to my next move, so to speak. So it's a very strange process, but it helps. It's inspiring because I feel kind of like I'm not it takes the pressure off me, because I feel like I'm almost watching something that already happened. Like I'm not.
That is so cool.
Yeah, like I'm not writing a new song. I'm accessing one that's already there. That's done.
It's kind of like, are you familiar with the concept of the Akashic record?
I've heard of that.
I mean, not that I'm any expert on it, but it's kind of a I love this because musicians oftentimes will say things that are kind of similar or adjacent to what you're saying. They're like, I don't know where it comes from, the creativity part. And so when it's interesting when students or fans ask me, well, what's your writing process? How do you get through it? And like I hear some people say, well, man, there are times when I sit down and I have something that's ready that kind of is, I'm already working on, that needs to be manifested. But oftentimes you hear people say, it just I kind of got a download. I kind of got a download from some place or another. And for you telling me that you have this kind of almost remote viewing into an alternate, like, imaginative future that gives you perspective, gives you objective point of view on what it is you're trying to do, and then it just flows in. I love that, because sometimes, like for myself, it'll like, I'm like, what is it that I'm trying to do? I'll ask myself that question, or I'll be on a dog walk or someplace random, and all of a sudden a song title comes to me. I see it on a, like how I would want to see it on the back of an album cover or something. I'm like, oh, I should write that song. I should work on that piece, and it probably sounds like this. I'll probably have this intro, like kind of like what you're saying. It's a little different, but I think really like that.
Yeah, I think we on some level, I do think there's something there, and I do think, and it's interesting because for fun, sometimes I love to read and watch videos and read articles on like quantum physics and just some of the breakthroughs in that science has made in the post-quantum physics world. Right. And really more what the implications of these discoveries are. But it seems to be widely accepted, like in the physics community, that the whole thing of time, the whole concept of time is an aspect of the mind, and that really there is no other time other than now. So that everything that has ever been and will ever be or could ever be is actually now. So this is not me trying to be some weirdo. This is literally mathematics that physicists are talking about. And experiments that kind of show this. So it is interesting to think that, when Stevie Wonder was interviewed, I remember there was an interview years ago and he was asked about the album he did called Songs in the Key of Life, which is like this, an album that really doesn't have one bad moment on it, No,
it's excellent.
Yeah. And he said the same thing. He said, I kind of don't feel like I wrote this. I feel like I just sort of was here as the catalyst, or the conduit, allowing this already existing stuff to come through. So
yeah, you just used two of my favorite words, conduit and catalyst, because I definitely feel connected to that way of being in the world, like that's kind of my place in the world. Like I get to kind of bring things together, and I think that a lot of us probably are in touch with that, and maybe not enough of us understand, because like there's a part of the ego thing when we think that we've figured it out, like, oh, this came from me. Then we get really precious about it because we see it as an extension of ourselves, right? And we were like, no, band members, you got to play it like this. This is my way or the highway type of thing, and that can have its place. But it's when we stop and we realize that like everything is happening now, and it's all overlaid reality. Right. All the ideas from all the different ages, future, past, all that stuff is all floating, and then one day you wake up and your brain switches on to the channel that says, this is what the guy's going to listen to in the car when he's in traffic. Right. That then it's like it feels a little more cosmic, a little bit more interesting to me than to say that, oh, I figured it out. No, I just tuned into the right channel and I wasn't forcing it. it was more of a relaxing
Yes.
into receiving the message than it is like a grinding out. I'm going to sort out this thing.
That's exactly right.
You know?
And that really is right, because I mean, every one of us can relate to the frustration of sitting down to write a song and then feeling like everything's been done. I got nothing to say. Oh, what am I going to, here's E. Where am I going to, or I can go to C. Let's see. Pentatonic. You know, you get frustrated because it's like, I have nothing, everything's been done. I don't know what to say. I have nothing to say. Or a lot of times you'll have a really cool riff you come up with, but then there's not that, I don't know where to go with this, right?
Right.
So I find that what you were just talking about, the sort of letting go and just saying, instead of me trying to act like I'm producing this, instead of feeling the pressure and the obligation to come up with something, how about if I just window shop and see what's available? Let me just relax, and maybe the answer will just sort of show up. And for me, I get the sense it is that way with you. When I am able to do that, when I just know that, oh, this is gonna work out. I don't know how, but it's gonna work out. It just does, you know.
It does.
It's just very, very strange.
I find that in general about life. I found that over and over and over again. And it usually, it's funny because I always end up getting sucked back into trying too hard.
Yes.
Always. It's like some sort of necessary tension in life. Like you have to forget that you're supposed to let go. You have to, you know, and then it's like, and I think as we get older and as we've lived a little longer, maybe that interval of how long we grind and try too hard is a little less.
Right.
A little less. And then we go, oh wait, no, I remember. I got to chill out here.
That's right.
I got to take a break, maybe go live some life and see what's available. And I love the feeling of when that realization, because it's happened so many times in my life that I love that when I come back, I'm like, there you are, my old friend. What was I doing? I was trying so hard. And here it is again.
This is a great conversation because I know there's probably a lot of people listening going, what are these couple of like weirdos talking about those crazy new age crap? But I don't think that any of this is actually that strange. I think this is known by many, many people who, particularly people who have done great things, big things, that you know, there's a power in intuition that can't be measured, but that you know is on some level and sometimes much more powerful than any super logical, critical thinking, no matter how much intellect you have. There's a power within sometimes intuition that's even bigger than all that. Just go with the flow, literally, and see what happens. You know.
Agreed. Well, it's interesting. There was I'll have to send it to you, but it's just this really very simple Venn diagram that somebody passed along to me. It's two circles, and on one side it has discipline, and the other side it has surrender, and in the middle it creates flow.
Nice.
And I thought, man, that might be my favorite thing that I've seen in a long time, because it brings me peace, like looking at it, because I'm like, that's right.
Interesting.
I'm a yoga instructor. I do a lot of yoga.
Nice.
It's kind of part of my personal philosophy that I've kind of been working with for years. And in that one of the common things that they say all the time is like, practice and all is coming.
Right.
Practice and all is coming. You're entitled to your work, but you're not necessarily entitled to the fruits of your labor. So, and that's a strange concept that people go, oh wait, you mean I can work? I can work hard, but I can't get anything out of it. I go, no, that's not it. The deal is that you have to be disciplined to your own thing, and you have to show up for yourself over and over again and do the work. If you want to be a shredder, if you want to be a musician, you want to be anything, you got to show up and do the work, be on time and be there. But then you can't keep grinding infinitely. You have to surrender. That's what you have to take the break. You have to have an interval of space. There's got to be a certain amount of time between tracks. You can't be all 16th notes. You have to have dynamic in the song. You have to have dynamic in your life. So in that surrender, that yielding to the notes not played, there becomes a flow between that discipline and that surrender. It's a combination.
Absolutely.
Of that.
Oh, it's great. That's great. Yeah. Because one has no meaning without the other, if you think about it. Correct. One has no meaning without the other. It's interesting, not to get we're super philosophical, but it's fun to do it, so we'll do it anyway.
Yeah, go for it.
But every now and then when I get into existential conversation with people, and it's the third glass of wine and everyone's one of the questions I'll ask someone or kind of pose to someone is just like, what would the world look like if it reflected your idea of perfection? What would that look like? And it's interesting because when you really think about it, what does that look like? So there's no sickness, everybody's prosperous, everyone's smart, everyone's beautiful, everyone's got a career that's successful, everyone's doing what they love. This is the utopian place. But when you stop and think about what that really is, it's eventually it's hell, because there's no reference to what it is that makes you appreciate those things. If everybody's rich, there's no such thing as that. If everybody's healthy, there's no such thing as health. If everybody is beautiful, there's no such thing as beauty. If everybody is the only thing that gives meaning to these things that we desire are the existence of them, is the existence of the opposite, right? The existence of what that isn't. And there would be no reference point to remind us how beautiful this stuff is if it was only that, right? So in a certain way, the only thing that makes shredding on a guitar impressive sounding or fun to listen to is the fact that exists not doing that. Right. When you hear a guy that shreds from start to finish, and we've heard these people sometimes, from the time you hit play on the device, it's just notes and notes and notes and notes. After a while, it actually doesn't sound fast. It just sounds like a one-dimensional nothingness. After a while, it just becomes nothing, because
it's the new normal, right? Like it's the new baseline.
Yeah, exactly. It's not against it. It's not referenced against anything. So, I think that's, in a certain way, I don't know, that's not really what you were saying before, but it's in that same vein.
Oh man, you're speaking my language, Greg. This is this is really my thing. And I really can't thank you enough for bringing up that particular point, because I think that is amazing. One of my favorite philosophers of all time is Alan Watts.
Oh yeah.
And he expresses this type of thing so beautifully in saying, hey, look, imagine going into the room and organizing everything as up, nothing down, everything up. Like it can't be done, because then there's no reference. There's no up. There is no up at that point.
Right. That's good.
If you want to straighten out this wiggly world into very geometric things, there won't be any tension to release.
That's right.
And that's the world, that's the universe that we've manifested in, is one of tension and release, of seeming polar opposites, right? But are different sides to the same coin. Because if, this black to this white, that they seem like they're separate things, but they meet in the middle, and they're the opposite. There's a gray area in the middle as they come together, right? And you don't even know what the white is unless there's a black, and unless there's a backdrop.
Exactly right. Yeah, there's no meaning to anything without the polarity, without its polarity. So I always find that to be fascinating, and it helps pull me back sometimes, because all of us in life, I think, get into, especially times like now, people are freaking out, everywhere. But sometimes I think it can be good for people, and this whole thing might be good for everybody, because it might just force people to have to go a little deeper within themselves to find a different version of security and strength, and something a little deeper than just a paycheck, or
right.
But I kind of lost my point, but I just think that yeah, I think that we all finally arrive at these this thing that we're talking about, where you get to a place where you're sort of like, what is all this about, you know? And music is amazing, because music sort of reflects, like you've said a few times, in a certain way, life, the process of life, you know, everything in, I did a video years ago that's on YouTube, and it was just talking about polarities and talking about how, if nothing else, if you're not able to, you know, if you're not at a point where you can start to, you know, sing along with what you, if you don't know what's going to come out of the guitar, if you're not improvising from here yet, you can at least set up interesting solos by having polarity, by just saying to yourself, well, I've got high notes and I've got low notes, I've got loud notes, I've got soft notes, I've got fast notes, I've got slow notes, I've got notes that are in time, I've got notes that kind of float over the rhythm and don't really on the grid at all. We have hard attack, we have soft attack, there's all these different ways to at least start playing with notes, and that can lead to at least, that can start to lead you to a theme, or start to help you find what you're looking for. But I just think sometimes to just think in terms of polarity can be very helpful. And it can, and during times like this, people can start asking themselves, what would the world look like if it was ideal? And what have I been thinking about? Where have we been? You know, maybe what's happening in this world right now isn't really separate from who we are. Maybe this is an expression of a, you know, a restart, a collective restart. You know, because
I like that. I think it's interesting too, because this conversation to me yields, if you follow it all the way, you go, oh, well, if the darkness and the negative things that are happening in the world are quite literally the backdrop to the good things that are happening in the world, and they're the reason why I know they're good,
right?
Then maybe I can get curious about cultivating a way of seeing the world that isn't so black and white. It isn't so I'm right, you're wrong,
right?
Left and right, Republican, Democrat, male, female, and that we can find some, even if it's not a way we favor, I don't favor people to die or bad things to happen. Of course not. I don't think any reasonable person does.
Right.
But we can learn to see the darkness for what it is and embrace it. Because if we don't embrace, if we're saying, oh, you know, I'm always trying to avoid darkness, I'm always trying to avoid this, and I'm always seeking pleasure, if that is the case, then I'm quite literally in avoidance of the actuality of the wholeness of this experience in this body on this earth.
It's a denial of half the show. I mean, it's a rejection of half the show. You know,
exactly.
So yeah, half the show is figuring out what you don't want to what you don't want to include in your world, and that's the only thing that gives clarity about what you do want to. So yeah, we have to include it, and we have to embrace it, and we have to say, it's really good for me to see. You know, when I was growing up, my parents, I've really never shared this, so you know, but my parents, even though they're beautiful people and they loved me, but they had a pretty dysfunctional relationship, and they would literally fight, sometimes fist fights, and I just can remember thinking, you know, physical, really, like this came to this, two grown adults that are actually having a physical, you know, violent interaction, and so I thought to myself, well, there are some really beautiful things about my parents, and many, you know, I'm going to take those with me when I get older. And there are some things about my parents that are really freaking ugly and really disturbing. And I'm glad I had a front row seat to see what that was, because now I know for sure that I'm not taking that with me, and I know how to, and I'll see it coming if there's ever anything that seems to be leading that way. So I'm, in a way, I almost feel like a lot of people would say, man, I came from this upbringing that I feel like I was a victim of. I wish it could have been different. I don't see it that way. I see it as a blessing, and I see it as what a tremendous gift that I was able to see the very best and some of the very worst of what life can be, and be able to have a very be able to make it very easy. Made it easier for me to go, oh yeah, I'll take the 2 of those, none of those, I'll take 1 of these, I'll take that. Yeah. So I consider it a blessing. Literally, I consider the dark times of my life blessings.
Same. Yeah. And that's such a Zen approach. And I think I love, I don't know if you're familiar, but this Buddhist monk, Pema Chodron, she has a quote somewhere that says something along the lines that is, learn to embrace all things that come onto your path, because they quite literally are the path. Each one of those things, be it good or bad, is a point and an opportunity for awakening to the truth of the moment. And you describing the tension between your parents, you're illustrating how that tension in your life, helped produce who you are now and how you navigate the world. And you're like, okay, cool. Like, yeah, is it ideal that they were fighting? Not at all.
Of course
not at all. Don't favor it. But I have learned to be thankful for the example that they set, because now I know better for myself.
Yes.
And I can move forward in a more positive, holistic way.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's kind of what I was. You're a much more eloquent way of saying what I was trying to say.
Oh, you did a great job. It's incredible. I would like to ask you, since you got to jam with Michael Jackson and Justin Timberlake on tours, and I mean, those are big names, man, and like those are, I mean, huge. And can you tell us a little bit about your experience with MJ, and then like later on with Justin and NSYNC? Like how was that for you?
It was amazing. It was amazing, especially the Michael Jackson one. I mean, all of it was, but the part of it that's weird is that the Michael Jackson one was so big. It was the first one, and it really, you can't outdo that. It would have been maybe nicer to build up to that, but I got like the greatest gig in the world as my first major gig. It was great. Jennifer Batten, who I'm sure you're familiar with, she was kind enough to tell me, I think at a NAMM show once, that she liked my playing. Of course, I love her playing, and she said that she was thinking about stepping off that tour, and that if she did, she would recommend me. And
wow.
I thought, wow, you got to be kidding me. So there's a long story that goes with that whole thing, but the short version is that eventually she did step off the tour. She did recommend me, and I did get the gig. And it was very short. It was only about 5 weeks that I was out there, and then she came back. She had to leave because her mother was ill and was going to be gone for as long as it took for either her mother to pass away or recover. And her mother did end up passing away. So as soon as that happened, she came back. And, but prior to that, it was, you can't imagine how amazing it was. It was, so I was living in Pennsylvania at the time, little apartment, and I get a frantic phone call from the guy, the music director, this guy named Brad Buxer. And he said, I need you on an airplane tomorrow morning at 6 from Newark Airport, which means I have to be there by 4, which means I have to leave my house by 2. And it's like 8 o'clock at night. And
wow.
And I hadn't really listened to any of this material because I just thought, I didn't think that I was going to get the gig, right? I had been told almost a year prior that I'd be getting a phone call at some point, and nothing happens. And this is before cell phones. So It's not like I could just have my phone with me. I was not like, literally, I was turning down gigs. I wasn't leaving my house because I didn't want to miss this phone call. So my life was kind of being put on hold. And so eventually when I finally decided I can't just sit around and keep waiting for an imaginary call, I'm just going to get back to my world. So I did, and I hadn't listened to any of the Michael Jackson material for months. So I get this frantic phone call, and I'm like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. So now I have to pack my stuff. I've got to like listen. I've got to grab my Walkman back then and listen to material. And the thing about the Michael Jackson gig was that, and this is, and I have to say this about Jennifer Batten. She not only gave me instructions in terms of how to play these songs, not that I needed her to show me how to play them, but she provided me her specific parts. She actually had a recording of her at a rehearsal with the tape recorder near her amp, so I could hear specifically what she was doing in the context of all the songs. Because there's two guitar players, you know, so you could get confused, like who's doing that, who's that? So she was very, she made it very clear. But the other thing that she made clear was the fact that every one of these songs was coming, back then she was using the, it was a Digitech unit. What the heck was it called? It was very popular back then.
It's that rack unit that everybody had back in the day?
Yes.
It's like a GSP 2001 or something like that. Yeah.
Something like that, right. But every song, you know, so, you know, if you're doing like, want to be starting something. Okay, verse, preset 031, you know, pre-chorus, preset 89, back to verse, and then chorus, preset 41, or whatever it is, you know. You had to have all that memorized with each song. It wasn't just knowing how to play it, it was knowing what the presets of her unit were going to be. So I had a lot to learn in like 6 hours, because you know, the phone call came in at 8 o'clock, and I've got to get in my car at 2 a.m. and I got to be packed, and I've got to have my stuff together. So anyway, when I got there, oh, and the other thing was that the call was on a Monday night, 8 o'clock, and the gig they needed me for was in Amsterdam for the Wednesday.
Oh man.
In front of 65,000 people. So it went from, and it was like, it was so freaky. It was just like, it was sort of one of those things, I'm sure you've experienced this before, where it's so overwhelming that it's best to not stop and try to comprehend it, just go. Like, I remember at one point thinking, I'm not gonna be able to do this. I can't learn these songs. I can't do this. Like, it just can't be done. I can't learn all this that fast. But I'm just gonna go, because I don't know, but I'm just gonna go. Let's see what happens. But you know, sure enough, on the airplane, I was listening, taking notes, and then when I got to Amsterdam, I had that Tuesday sort of kind of in the afternoon to go through stuff a little bit more. And by Wednesday, which was the day of the gig, they wanted to do a sound check with me in the morning. It wasn't a sound check. They wanted to rehearse me, make sure that the new guy knew what he was doing. So we went through about 4 or 5 songs around 11 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. The band was not happy about it because, of course, they all had been on tour. They're all out partying, so now they all have to get up early for the new guy and go through these songs. But anyway, we got through about 4 songs, and I remember thinking, okay, I think I can do this. It's coming together. I'm doing it. I'm getting through it. And the production manager came over to me at one point. He says, sounds great. Sounds fine. You're doing fine. I said, oh, okay, good. Thank God. He says, okay, so let's talk about the choreography. Now, this is literally the day of... Let's talk about choreography. I'm like, let's talk about what? So it got to a point. So remember, I have to learn the songs. I have to know all the presets on this Digitech unit. Now I have to learn choreography. And if you watch any of those clips from that tour, and probably most of the tours, but on the tour that we did was, what was the name of it? It'll come to me. whatever you guys can, whoever's listening, just look it up. It was 1996, I think. Whatever that tour was, is the tour I was on. But so I had to create this gigantic poster size, literally like 5 foot by 4 foot sheet of paper that went around my pedal board that was like, okay, song 1, whatever that was, preset, blah, 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 for verse, pre-chorus, chorus, second verse, preset, blah, 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 take 2 steps forward, spin around twice, wait for dancers to pass by, come back, preset 41. Like, I had to have it all, every song, because if you watch those tours, it's really the lead guitar player who does all the interacting with Michael. Nobody else in the band does that, just the lead guitar player. So I had all that to learn in basically, less than 48 hours. But, and one of the things was handling a pyro guitar, this literally an explosive device. So, and I remember the production manager's like, it's a pyro guitar. You're going to hit the switch, you're going to go over to stage right, and then wait for Michael, wait for the dancers. You're going to hit the second switch, and you want to be careful at that point because the coils are heating up and you want to da-da-da-da-da. And you get over here, Michael will run to the front of the stage, you run up there with him, and then aim the guitar towards the audience headstock and make sure that you aim it away from it or else you'll blow your face off. And he was talking so fast. He's like, here's switch number 1, stage right, blow your face off. I'm like, what? No, we're gonna go through that again, nice and slow. So that was crazy, but the actual tour was just incredible. The show was amazing beyond description, and I didn't even get a chance to really know that until Jennifer came back, because Jennifer came back, and and they didn't send me home until they saw her. So we were both, they wanted to make sure she was there. So when she came back from being out, I said to her, do you want to play right away? Or do you want me to play tonight? Or do you want to just jump right in? And she's like, yeah, I want to jump right in. I was like, all right, cool. So I got to watch the show from the soundboard. And it was the first time I'd actually seen the show, because being in the show is not seeing the show.
No.
And it was unbelievable, just unbelievable. And there was a point that I had with all that, but you were asking about just the nature of it. Yeah, so the show was incredible. The band itself we had our own private jet, right? So this is the type of tour it was. Just the biggest, greatest, think of hotel rooms with gold fixtures on everything, gigantic, windows and just everything's the top of the line. Everything was top of the line. To the point where it's just like, you can't believe you're getting paid for this. And a lot, getting paid an awful lot of money to go out and have a really good time. So it was amazing.
And were you able, I know it was only like 5 weeks, but was there any little moments in there where you had like a personal interaction with Michael?
Well, the very first thing that ever happened with me regarding Michael was the very first show I did. I hadn't seen him, so Michael was, even as part of the entourage, you don't really see him that much. He had a small group of people that he hung out with. Usually he'd come into the dressing room right before showtime, so he'd hang out there for a good 15, 20 minutes, do the prayer meeting, and the band would get together prior to going on stage. But during the day, you didn't see him. So I'm in the dressing room about a half hour before we're going on stage for the first show. And I'm just kind of warming up and I'm nervous, and I'm just going through scales and trying to remember songs. And I'm standing by this coat rack that I didn't realize I was standing next to. Well, there was some item that he needed to wear for the opening part of the show. So I look up, and then Michael Jackson's like walking right towards me. It's the first time I've seen him, right? Like, oh my God, that's him. That's okay. Don't look. All right, keep practicing. Or should I look at him? Should I say hi? All right, I'll just, I was like, holy shit, that's Michael Jackson. Yeah. So he walks right up to me and he says, excuse me, I need to get that clothing item that you're standing in front of. I was basically in his way. So the very first interaction with Michael Jackson was, him basically saying, could you get the fuck out of my way? No, he was really, really nice. Very quiet, very introverted, really, really intensely quiet, if that makes any sense. There's an intensity to him even when he's not doing anything. You feel his presence, literally. And when he hits that stage, he literally transforms before your eyes into, I went from I'm hiding behind everything over here to I own the freaking world. It was the weirdest transformation I've ever seen in anyone. It's like he truly lived on stage. That was where he lived. That was where his greatest experience of being alive took place.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he was not joking around about being, you know, so one of the things that I have to say, because you're asking about him, is that he, so the show, that's why I brought up the show. The show is so insane. There's things flying around, dancers everywhere, you know, all kinds of props, stuff moving, you know, moonwalks and all kinds of people, you know, remember that big lean thing? And
oh yeah, could never forget that.
You're right. And this is all happening on stage, and it's happening all the time. And the show's moving quick, you know, there's medleys. So there was a song that we were doing, just one of the, it might have been the song Wanna Be Starting Something, but I don't remember. It was something off of the Thriller album. And my guitar part was very minimal. Very minimal. It was just some kind of, you know, it might have been like maybe that part, or just some kind of like, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, so after the show, and while I'm playing that part, he's like way over there, like on some flying machine or something. You know, he's completely nowhere near me. So after about the second or third show, he came up to me again. You know, he literally walks up to me, and I'm like, is that Michael Jackson coming up to me? He's coming up to me. He's not, oh my God, he's walking up to me. So he walks right up to me. He's like, hey, I just want to let you know you're doing a really nice job. He says, but when you're playing the rhythm part for that song, whatever song it was, if you could pull it back a little bit, you're a little bit on top of the beat. And I was thinking, really? You're listening? Really? You heard that? Aren't you like, you're in another zip code, for God's sakes, when I'm playing that part. Like, he's listening to all of it. And it really made me realize he's responding to, the reason he needs a band that's really good is because he is responding to the way that it feels. It has to feel. There was a night I was doing the Beat It solo, and I'll never forget this. I was doing the Beat It solo, and I had to go out with him. So every time we do the Beat It solo, I have to walk. We both walk sort of across the stage together, while and I have to sort of perform while I'm playing it, and then we end up facing each other, kind of dancing, you know, during, you know, whatever that is. And he's got this look in his eye, and he's like, the look is almost speaking of, take it to another level. Take the fire to another level. He grabs my shoulders and like spins me around in the middle of the solo. So my hands go flying off the, it's like, and I'm thinking, what does that sound like with a, you know, 9 million watt PA system, you know? But it meant I could feel that the performance and the intensity and being connected to the music meant so much to him that don't try to just get away with playing the music, the right notes. It can't just be correct. It has to feel perfect. It has to feel like I move. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I could tell it meant everything to him how the band feels. The fact that he's going to point out a feel on a very subtle, nuanced rhythm part that I'm playing while he's in performance mode, the fact that he hears that means that he needs to hear it. And it means that he needs to feel it the right way.
It makes sense to me, especially for him being a dancer from such an early age. Because there's a pocket that you need as a dancer, right? Like
Right.
it's like
Yes.
as the whole band wants to find the pocket and make sure that they're coming together at the right way,
Right.
that a dancer can't necessarily find that if the band isn't in the right place. So
Right, exactly.
I can hear that. That's really it. What a great story, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was a great tour. It was short-lived, but it was something, of course, I'll never forget. And it was just unbelievably amazing. Just to be able to say, you know, that it was just, it's still to this day kind of a surreal experience. But it did help with getting the other gigs, because what I started to notice is that the industry, much like probably most industries, is often dictated not so much by how talented you are, but what your credentials are. What's your credibility? Who have you worked with?
Sure.
Who do you know? So when you get to say, I played with Michael Jackson, you pretty much take your pick on a gig. There were situations in the past where I've been like, where I've seen music directors who will say things like, well, we got this guitar player is good, this guitar player is really good, this guy's incredible, blah, blah, blah. And Greg, what about you? Well, I played with Michael Jackson. Oh, you played with Michael? Yeah. Oh, you played with Michael? Oh, okay, this is probably the guy. You know, you can feel that just puts you to the front of the line. So it made it easy when I got the next big gig, which was Enrique Iglesias in his prime with his big album with Balamos on it and all that. And that was in 2000. And I should give props to a guy named Skip Dorsey, who is a great guitar player and who at that time was playing with Britney Spears. So I'll back it up a little bit. In 99, I was living in Easton, Pennsylvania. And I was a little frustrated, to be honest with you, at that point, because I was, I'd already been into my career now, for my professional career, for about 10 years. I got signed in 88, so 11 years. And I had a bunch of albums out. I had my, at that point, let's see, 5 or 6 albums, 7 albums maybe. Greg Howe, High Gear, Now Hear This, Introspection, Parallax, Uncertain Terms, 5. Project album, as well as the Tilt album with Richie Kotzen, and an album called Ascend. So actually I had, and another album that I was working on called Hyper Acuity. So I had 10 albums out already.
Wow.
And that was cool, but I remember being frustrated because I wasn't making a whole lot of money. I wasn't really touring. Big things, the fame wasn't correlating to the fortune.
Right.
So I remember that I got an email from this guy, Skip Dorsey, who was saying, hey, I'm in the Britney Spears group and I'm going to be in your area. We have some days off in your area, and I was hoping I could take some guitar lessons from you. So he came over, and we not only played guitar a lot together, but we became friends. And I said to him, man, I'd love to have one of these gigs. This would really be nice to have one of these kind of gigs, just to make a bunch of money and just kind of relax and get the pressure of trying to make it on my own. Get rid of that pressure for a second. Just go out and make some money and have fun, tour the world. And he said, oh yeah, I could make that happen. So he hooked me up with a guy named Kevin Antunes. And Kevin at that time was working with a management company called Johnny Wright Management. And they were handling just about everybody that was part of that kind of teen pop world. Back then it was NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears, 98 Degrees, all those kind of bands, groups. And so he got me on the Enrique Iglesias tour, and that was great. That was a really fun tour, and that was in 2000. And it was a small, it was actually ideal because Enrique was huge then. This was his biggest album ever. He had like 3 or 4 hits, big hits on the radio, that were on the radio all the time. He was in his prime. He was young. And yet his organization was relatively small and kind of family oriented. So it wasn't a gigantic, it wasn't like one of those 75 tour buses and, you know, 80 trucks kind of tours like a Michael Jackson thing or NSYNC.
Sure.
It was a nice tour. We were playing good sized venues. We were doing a lot of big amphitheaters and also just arenas. You know, he was doing 10,000 seaters. I think we had a couple of 20,000 seaters over in Europe. The tour went throughout Europe. It was a really, really relaxing tour. And he was very down to earth, believe it or not. He's a very down to earth guy. He liked to interact with the band. A lot of times these principal artists sort of separate themselves from the band. They're like,
sure,
you guys are hired. You're over there. You sit at the little kids table. We're over here. You come work for me. But he was not that. He wanted to hang out with us all the time. He was a very, very, really cool guy. So that was a fun tour. And then immediately when that tour, and that lasted for about a whole year. That was like almost the whole year of 2000. So for me, it was great because it was a break from my thing. It was really good money. It's just going into my bank account, and I'm touring the world. I was a single guy at that time, so that was fun, you know, because you're like playing in front of these gigantic crowds that are just essentially nothing but 23-year-olds girls. And so it was a really nice, much needed and appreciated era of my life, that thing. And then when that tour ended, I immediately got the NSYNC gig. And that was also nice. Now, the NSYNC gig was more closer to like a Michael Jackson thing. It was
sure,
lots of big production. They had a management staff of like, just the management staff on tour alone was like 30 or 40 people or more. There were people that on that tour that I never even met. There were people that I still to this day, who was that guy? I never met him.
Wow.
And that was a fun tour. I mean, the band was really cool. I got along with everybody. All the principal members of NSYNC were really cool. And surprisingly, they were all very talented. I didn't think that any of these boy band type of things were real. I thought they were all just contrived. I didn't think that any of them could really sing that well. I just thought it was going to be a contrived, plastic, put together thing. But when I got to the NSYNC rehearsal, I will never forget this. They were walking around separately in this big warehouse that we had rented, or they had rented, I think in Miami. And they're all just sort of walking around, and they're all singing some Beatles medley that they had done from the previous tour in perfect harmony. They're not even trying. Like, they're just all just doing it while they're tying their shoes, and they're in separate parts of the room, but they're all singing in perfect harmony. And I remember thinking, oh, you guys can actually sing. They were the real deal. So that blew my mind. And that tour was fun. That was just it was huge. The first tour that we did was a stadium tour, so it was all 50, 60, 70, 80,000 outdoor, you know, people, outdoor venues. And a lot of the types of shows where you get to meet other big celebrities, you know.
Sure.
I got to see James Brown, Bette Midler, Janet Jackson, you know, just like other gigantic people too. So I hope that's answering your question. It was fun. It was fun,
yeah.
and it was good for me in the sense that, first of all, it did really fill up my bank account, which was nice. But it also, yeah, and it also it gave me a reset. I was ready to get back to being Greg Howe again. You know, I was like, okay, I got a new charge. I'm ready. I got new inspiration. I'm ready for this now. I'm ready to come back, and I feel inspired again. I feel like I want to get back to that. In fact, I actually walked off. I finally quit that world. It wasn't easy because, man, you're getting paid a lot of money. A lot of money. And what are you doing? You're traveling around. You're getting to sightsee, meet new people, eat great food, stay at beautiful hotels, travel. I mean, there's really no logical reason to give that up. Other than I needed to get back to expressing myself. It wasn't enough to just play rhythm guitar behind some 22-year-old pop star. I have to be involved in the creative process. That is what I was learning was my real thing, to be in a creative environment. More so even than being a quote unquote guitar hero. If guitar playing was outlawed for some strange reason in the world, it would not change the fact that I would be absolutely, completely involved in music in a creative manner in some level. Sequencing drums or coming up with a bass line or spending hours trying to think of a clever chord progression is just as much fun as practicing scales for me. So,
and it sounds like it was like a necessary tension that you ended up releasing as you came back too. So it's like you got to go find out, because like a lot of people, and I've had this happen a handful of times in my world where I've had people that are like, hey man, you know, it's like, it's such a struggle. I need to get that big gig and go on the road. Right. And I'm like, man, I really wish that for you. I hope that, you know, like answers all your questions and, you know, just pulls you out of debt or whatever the thing is. And then a couple of my friends got gigs and they did blow up and they took off. And then within 6 months to a year, maybe it's the 2-year mark, they're like, man, this is empty. Like, it is a good gig, but it's their thing. It's not my thing.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it was. And once again, I become, I don't want to say envious, but I'm really, it's, you know, I do know a couple of guys who are in that world who are great guitar players, who are good enough that they could easily have their own instrumental guitar careers if they had a marketing plan about it. But
sure.
But they are really content. Like, yeah, I've had this gig for, you know, 24 years. I like it. They're cool with it. They're just like, they have no, so sometimes I envy that. Like, wow, you have no need to get that out. You have no real passion to get your own creative voice heard. And you're cool with that. Like that, I think that's fantastic. Like, sometimes I really wish that I didn't need to express myself as much as I do.
Hey man, I hear you. And I had a couple friends of mine, actually, my buddy Devin Townsend, he said it pretty eloquently one time. He goes, hey buddy, are you playing? And I said, well, you know, lately, like, I was at a point where I was like, I don't know if I feel like I have anything to say, or I don't know. I'm just, yeah, a little bit, you know, I'm playing. He's like, hey, well, if you don't got nothing to say, that's kind of a good thing, right? Because you're not a victim, or you're not a slave to it, right? Necessarily, right? Like, because when we have to do, when we feel compelled, we're kind of owned by our ambition in a certain way, right? Like, okay, you know, and everybody on the outside looking in goes, oh man, how cool is it that Greg always has something to say, you know? And on the inside, every once in a while, Greg is like, man, I wish I didn't have so much to say. Like, I have to work on this stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of, that does happen. And I think, you know, one of the things that I am evolving with, I like to use the word evolve as opposed to getting better at. I don't necessarily say that I'm a better guitar player today than I was 20 years ago, but I've certainly evolved. Sure. But one of the things I do hear when I go back and hear some of my earlier albums is this pent up, there's so much to say that I'm trying to fit it all in a song, right? And to get it all on one album. And so you're kind of getting bombarded. It's like a drive-by of notes. And it's sometimes when I go back now and imagine being a listener to that music when it came out, it's kind of overload information. It would be like if I heard one of my albums, some of those albums back then, from back then now, I could imagine thinking to myself, I'm going to have to give this a break and then come back and listen to this again, one song at a time, because there's too much going on here. So one of the things I think I'm getting better at as I evolve is space, you know, breathe. It doesn't all, you know, it's like a great actor. Sometimes the very most impressive moments of a great actor is when they're not saying anything. It's just an expression on their face. And you're like, that expression said 1,000 times more than any crowded sentence could have conveyed. And I'm learning that more and more. And when I listen to guys like Derek Trucks, I'm like, good Lord, you know, you played 4 notes and the hair on my arm standing up. I mean, it's the new shred for me. Like, it's not that, it's just, it's tough to keep getting excited about some guy that can do a million notes and arpeggios these days. Because everybody can. Not everybody, but so many people can do that.
Sure.
But there aren't that many people who can really make me go, oh, wow, I just felt something big. I don't care how you did it, with a bunch of notes or with no notes or with 1 note or with 4 notes or with, I don't care how you do it. That's the only thing I want anymore, is to, like Holdworth could do that with a bunch of notes. He would do that to me.
Sure.
Well, and so it's like he could blow me away, not because it's the technique, but because the technique was the way he made himself heard. He made himself felt. When I see some of these other guys, like Eric Gels is another guy, you know.
Oh man, love Eric.
You know, 30 seconds in and I'm in. It's like, my God, I don't. How are you doing that? How are you? I know how to play that scale, but it never. When I do it, I'm not making the hair on my own arm stand up. How are you doing that? So it's new. I'm not saying it's new. Of course, feel has always been important to me, and expression has always been important. But it's moved up the totem pole of priority for me, where it is really the only thing now that I'm interested in, is making sure that when you walk away from what I'm doing, that you feel differently than you did when you got there. That's it. That I affected you in some way emotionally, not I just impress you. Maybe I didn't impress you. Maybe I didn't impress you at all. But whatever I did, I affected you. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So
it does make a lot of sense, because I think about it in my own way too, because early on, my focus was on I wanted to be shock and awed through a flurry of notes, and I would rewind and listen to these passages by my favorite players, and sit around with other friends smoking a joint going, what can you wait, how is this possible? We would just pick apart these little things, and we weren't really so focused on the overall statement being made, and it could have been a beautiful statement from start to finish in this song, you know, musically or lyrically or anything, but we were so fixated on the acrobatics and the technique quality of it, right? But as you evolve, you're like, as a human in language, like, I want to hear some depth to what it is that you're saying. I want to know that there's some quality experience behind what it is that you're saying, so that then I feel like I'm actually being communicated to in a way, right? So I think that's where I hear you saying that a little bit, you know, is to say, like, oh, now I'm more interested in, like, saying something with depth and quality to it. It doesn't mean that you're not going to give us a flurry of notes, because you still think in these complex ways.
Right.
But.
Right. It's like, you know, if Stephen King did a seminar and you wanted to know how to write fiction and you went to his seminar, it would be pretty weird if everybody was asking him about his typing skills. And what kind of typer do you use, or what kind of keyboard do you prefer? Where's the action of the keys? And do you use your pinky when it's like, okay, well, these things are probably on some level important, but the point here is we're trying to tell a story. The point here with music is that we're trying to tell a story. And so if we're caught up all the time on the execution of notes and stuff, in a way, we're really missing the point. And as young kids, you have an excuse, because we've been taught at that point that, look, if you can run faster than everybody else, you'll get a medal. If you can type faster than everybody else, you'll get your homework done better. You know, if you can, anything you can do well, if you can do it faster than somebody else, you're better at it than that guy. So with music, we just tend to take that mentality with us until we grow up and learn that it really doesn't apply at all in the same way when it comes to a creative endeavor like this. Jimi Hendrix was a guy that I didn't understand until about 10 years after Van Halen. So When I started getting into Van Halen, I was a teenager. And of course I knew who Jimi Hendrix was. And yeah, we all enjoyed some of that. But I remember people would say things to me like, can you play Hendrix stuff? Jimi Hendrix is the greatest. Can you play that? And I remember literally thinking as a 17-year-old kid, what's so freaking great about Jimi Hendrix? He's out of tune. He's sloppy. He's not a good singer. I'm playing Van Halen stuff, guys. Have you heard me? And because I was completely missing the point. I completely missed Hendrix, right? And and so finally, when I grew up and was, recognizing the value and the sort of fundamental value of expression as a musician, I remember hearing Hendrix all of a sudden and going, how did I miss this? How did I miss this? Are you kidding me? This is like, now I understand why people say this is one of the greatest of all time. Sure. I didn't get it because I was only listening to the acrobatics, just the physical stuff. So that process, I guess, has never ended. It keeps happening. The older I get, the more and more expression becomes it becomes the only real issue.
Well, and it's the thing, right? So like you said a bunch of times in different ways throughout this conversation is that, all the chord changes pretty much been done. We're using the same notes. We're using a very similar instrument, even if it's a little nicer now than it ever was before, all these things. But what hasn't been done is you doing this now, right? It's like, so you interpreting reflecting your life and your internal experience outwardly in this moment, in this phase of your life, right? At this point of evolution, that hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And so once you tap into being sensitive to someone's momentary expression, it being captured, then it's when you go back to Hendrix, you go back to the early days of Sabbath and Zeppelin and these tunes, and because those were messy days. Yeah. They were breaking ground in a way that we can only just like salivate about now, because it doesn't feel like it's even a thing you can do anymore. But you go back and you hear that, you're like, oh man, it's so crazy that we all love this tune, but it's out of tune and he's not a great vocalist. That's weird. But we idolize it because for different reasons for different people, but because it's so unique, and this person was being sincere in their expression, and it was not completely flatline figured out. It's not quantized, because that's the experience of being human. We're not quantized. We're not exact. Like our left and right sides of our body aren't even completely, symmetrical.
That's right.
Like my hip is one way on this side and it's on the other way,
It's very true. That's very, very true. That's why music today, a lot of music in pop radio, especially, it's tougher. It really is a challenge to embrace some of it, because it feels like so much of the soul has literally been swept out of the room, because it's so precise that somehow that doesn't really resonate with a natural existence. It doesn't resonate with how I am, or with how a human being is. So the beauty of some of this older music, especially from the 70s, is that it seemed to really be in alignment with who we are, as the nature of the human spirit. And it wasn't, people were, how do I say this? The individual nature, the signature nature, this individual signature that people would have, the essence of who they were, was the issue, right? That it wasn't how good are you. Nobody was saying things like, Carole King's a better singer than Carly Simon. People weren't thinking that way, right?
Right.
They were just like, wow, what a great artist. Wow, what a great song. What a great expression. What a great feeling I have from this music. When I watch an actor like Christopher Walken, right, who I love.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that I love watching him because I think he's the best actor out there. It's that you just can't get that anywhere else but there.
Nope.
That's the only place that exists. So that's, to me, is really the whole point of being an artist, you know, and that's what people are responding to when they hear something that they really love. When people are watching some great band like Earth, Wind and Fire or Sting or whoever they're watching, and they're going, it's not just that it's great. Of course it's great. But the deeper thing is that this is the only place you can get this. This doesn't exist anywhere else. So this is where I have to go for this. It's not like McDonald's where you know, I mean, where like
a Starbucks where it's all, you can know what you're going to get every time you go there, right?
Right. Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, I love it, man.
Yeah.
Man, Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. We just hit like the 2-hour mark. We're pretty close.
Oh, no. Yeah. Well, you were fun. This was a good one. It's always nice when it's kind of like, you know, I'm not talking about, 10 through 46 gauge strings. JJ tubes. Working on a new album. So yeah, it was kind of nice to get into some really cool conversation.
Same, man. And I mean, this podcast, thankfully I get to do that with this podcast. And sometimes the conversation goes really heavily into gear, and we stay there. But you know, you're a great conversationalist, and I'm glad you're so open to the kind of the existential conversation too, because I think it helps shine light for the people that are here kind of tuning in, like, oh, I want to know about how Greg does this really particular they go, oh, well, I didn't get that, but I got a different thing. And oftentimes those technical things only yield you so much. It's like the common thing, like, oh, that's a really great thing. Where are the tabs? Can I find the tabs? Where are the tabs? Can you send me tabs? And it's like, well, okay, hold on. Like maybe tabs are going to help you. I don't know the tabs are what you're really looking for. I think you're looking for the feeling of the thing, you know? Exactly. And so when you hear the depth of your character and know more about Greg Howe's experience being on stage with Michael Jackson, that might change. Oh, wait, like, okay, this is perspective.
Right. Maybe tablature isn't my next immediate goal. Maybe it's something else. Yeah. Maybe I've been maybe my mind has been sort of influenced to go a different route in my next move. But yeah. Well, man, I want to you know, wrap it up here and just again say thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I'm really looking forward to what direction, how you shift into this next album and whatever kind of secret dealings you got going on. I'll be excited to know when you release that stuff, you know, and let us know about it. We'll keep you we'll keep you informed for sure. Absolutely.